All right, let's talk about something really fundamental. Today, we're looking at two totally different ways of seeing a person who's hurting. Are we just a collection of symptoms that need to be fixed? Or is there something more going on? A deeper story that's waiting to be heard? How we answer that question, well, it changes everything.
You know, it really all boils down to this one question. When someone is struggling, what do we see first? Do we see a case that needs to be managed, or do we see a person who needs to be understood? The choice we make right there, it changes the entire approach. And this is the question that's going to guide us through this whole explainer.
So you've got these two competing views. On the one hand, you can see someone as a symptom bearer. In this view, the person kind of gets reduced to a diagnosis, a list of problems that need to be treated. But then you have this other idea, the image bearer. This view sees a person as someone with moral meaning, a real living person with their own unique story and inherent worth. Okay, so here's how we're going to break all this down. First, we'll look at the promise of the medical model, which is the dominant view today. Then, we'll see where those labels just don't quite cut it. From there, we'll dig into the hidden ideal that psychology is often aiming for, check out how our brains are actually wired for meaning, and finally, we'll map out a new way forward, beyond just symptoms and into the real story.
All right, first up, let's dive into the framework that pretty much dominates how we think about this stuff today, the medical model. The basic idea here is to approach the human mind kind of like it's a machine that you can diagnose and, well, repair. And you can see why it's so powerful, right? The logic is super straightforward. It basically assumes that for every psychological issue, there's a biological glitch somewhere, an individual organic source. So the job seems clear. Find the problem, give it a name, and then apply a treatment to fix it. Simple. So, in the real world, this means focusing on symptoms to come up with a diagnosis, a label. And the whole point of treatment? Get rid of the disorder. But here's the thing. When you take this idea to its logical extreme, you can end up with something called neurogenetic determinism. It's this reductionist belief that everything about us, our deepest thoughts, our choices, our feelings, it all just boils down to our genes and our neurons. That's it.
But what happens when that neat little label doesn't actually capture the whole picture? This is exactly where you start to see the cracks forming in that purely mechanical view of a person.
You know, therapists actually have a term for this, the presenting symptom. It's the problem someone first walks in the door with. Maybe it's anxiety or a specific fear. But so often, that's really just the ticket to get into therapy. The real stuff, the underlying problems, they're usually buried a lot deeper. And this brings me to a really powerful quote from the psychologist George Kelly. It's such a great challenge to this idea that the expert has all the answers. It's a reminder that sometimes the most profound insights, the most important information, it comes from just listening to the person's own story. Okay, here's another layer of complexity that a simple diagnosis just can't handle. Think about it like this. There's our moral competence, that's our inner values, what we know deep down is right. But then there's our moral performance, which is how we actually act. Things like stress or fear or intense emotion, they can drive a huge wedge between the person we want to be and the person we are in that moment. So this all leads to a fascinating question, doesn't it? If we're trying to fix people, what are we trying to turn them into? What's the actual goal? Because every single approach to therapy has some kind of unspoken ideal of what a healthy person is supposed to be. And this quote from Maps of Meaning just nails it. It points out that psychiatry has this implicit ideal. It's an unconscious picture of what we should be. We tend to define health as just the absence of a disorder, but that means we're constantly comparing ourselves to this imaginary, perfect person who's never anxious, never depressed. We're chasing a target we haven't even properly defined. So what's the alternative? This is where the image bearer framework comes in. It offers a very clear and explicit ideal. And you don't have to take it theologically to get the point. The core idea, philosophically, is that every human being has intrinsic worth, defined by this amazing capacity we all have, the capacity to create, to transform, and to find meaning, no matter what our circumstances are. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds a bit philosophical, maybe not very scientific, but this is what's so cool. Modern neuroscience is actually revealing a brain that looks a heck of a lot more like it was designed for a meaning-making image bearer than for a simple machine. Just take a look at this. This bizarre-looking diagram is the motor homunculus. It's literally a map of your body as it's represented in your brain's cortex. It's such a powerful visual reminder that we are not just brains in a vat. Our minds aren't separate from our bodies. Our brains are fundamentally built for our physical existence in the world. And our brains aren't some static piece of hardware that's fixed from birth. No way. They are constantly being rewired by our experiences. And new science like epigenetics is showing that our relationships, our culture, the meaning we find in our lives, all of this can literally change how our genes are expressed and how our brains are physically structured. It's absolutely incredible.
And listen, this isn't some fringe idea. There's a whole wave of top neuroscientists backing this more holistic view. You've got Alan Shore, whose work shows how our very sense of self is formed through relationships. Antonio Damasio has demonstrated that our thinking is completely inseparable from our emotions and our bodies. And then there's Ian McGilchrist, who revealed how our two brain hemispheres give us two different ways of knowing the world, one that sees it as a machine, and another that sees it as a living, interconnected reality.
Okay, so let's bring this all together. What does all this actually mean in practice? It means shifting our entire goal away from just treating symptoms and toward helping a person find transformation by helping them understand their own story.
This new path really has 3 key steps. First, there's empathic joining. This is about building a shared understanding of the problem, not just sticking a label on it. Second is motivational clarification, which is all about helping a person figure out what they truly want by exploring their values, their wishes, and their fears. And finally, narrative construction, helping them weave all the different parts of their life into a story that's coherent and meaningful. And that leaves us with one final, powerful shift in thinking. It's such a simple change in a question, but it reflects a profound change in perspective. So what really changes for us and for the people we want to help when we move from seeing a diagnosis that needs to be fixed to seeing a human story that's waiting to be heard?